I guess we're live. This is Benjamin Boyce, and it's Tuesday, the 5th of May, and I'm sitting here and I'm taking a break from editing video of protest, and I'm going to read something that I produced, or I guess you could say writ, in the time of my life that I was spent in college not too long ago. So this is from The Prophet of the Beautiful, which is a novel in 3 parts, a triptych that was composed for the Dark Romantics program at the Evergreen State College over the 2013-2014 school year. As it is a triptych, it's in 3 parts. I'm going to read from the first part, beginning with that, what's it called? The title quote. What's it called? There's a quote at the beginning of a book. I can't remember the name of it. I'm getting a little rusty in the ways of literature. Too much video is bad for the brain. Do you create men too? I asked one of the workmen. But he answered, men come from above and not below. How could we possibly create ourselves? All we do here is to formulate, through successive advances in our industries, a more subtle matter than the one that forms the earth's crust. These flowers which seem natural to you, this animal which appears to live, these will be merely the products of art, raised to the highest point of our knowledge, and everyone will look on them as such. Gerard de Nerval, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, Ariella, translated by Jeffrey Wagner. Introduction. To the editors of Roma More Press, the following manuscript was sent to me by a friend who has since expatriated from the United States and enlisted in the French Foreign Legion. Like many of the Legion's foreign nationals, he has joined in the hopes of securing a new life for himself, as the old one proved no longer tenable, due either to misfortune or mistake. My friend's mistakes, the needful modifier being alleged, are indeed on the dire end of the spectrum, and combined with the included manuscript, form a novel species of insight into the life of an embattled poet, at least to my mind. Acting on this intuition, I have included a number of his letters which detail his circumstances and the manner of his thought, and also provide a fitful counterpoint, if not thematic harmony, with the manuscript, which he insisted was not a work of fiction, or at least not of his own invention. I have my doubts on that account, but as to the details of his personal life, there exists ample evidence showing his situation as, if not exactly how he describes it, then circumstantially identical. To give additional context, we met at the University of Quebec years ago, in 1960 . Though he was, and may still technically be, an American citizen, his mother is Canadian and secured him a spot on the rolls by dint of an influence he often referred to, though always sarcastically. As an aside, what most attracted me about him was his devilish way of both revealing and concealing what was real and true about him. It was my struggle to differentiate between his honesties and dishonesties, my struggle to sort through his glamour, that kept me eager to keep abreast of his circumstance after we parted ways. He was enrolled in the university for only his freshman, my sophomore year, where he took mostly humanities courses and flunked out of anything science-related. I believe it was his stringent anti-authoritarianism that made anything objective, that is, empirical, painfully aggravating for him to engage with. This predisposition to sing on steps rather than study at desks swooned at least one young woman whose fate was thereafter bound to his, as in spring of 1960 they moved to Greenwich Village, where he intended to make a name for himself as a singer in the then nascent folk scene, which has since become a hotbed for the present generation's poetic effulgence, if I may be allowed a turn of phrase. After they moved to New York City, our friendship was strictly epistolary, from which I have derived the following letters, slightly edited for the sake of pertinence. Sincerely yours, Jonathan Lever. Fredericton, New Brunswick, early spring 19 blank. Forward. Being letters from Ibid, IBID dot, to JL. Jonathan, Leith and I have been getting along quite well, thanks for asking. The air here is alternately oppressive and gallant, full of hope and pathetic self importance, as the young people crowd around notions of revolution and inspiration, but rarely make any headway with their ambition. At times it seems like our generation is all blister and hot air, that we are content with getting off on the speed of the train before the destination is even decided, let alone reached. The contrary desires for sensual pleasure, social harmony, and spiritual renewal twist about each other into hopelessly tangled knots, as heated discussions into the earliest hours are overheard in every bar and boudoir and creaky stairwell, where attempts to weave high ideals to cogent realities are proven to be nothing but mixtures of semantics and conviction. I tire of all this promise. Yet I keep sniffing for inspiration. Ibid. Jonathan, every now and then I discover something unexpected in these clubs, cafes, and cigarette huddles. Every now and then, not the poetic, but poetry herself emerges from out a burst of laughter or the fixing of a blouse and a skirt. But rarely does this happen on a stage. Rarely, if ever, does she surface when there is more than one person paying attention. And is this as it should be? Is poetry necessarily obscured? Is she inherently a tease? Does she think that were all of us to spy her nipple all at once, we would stop seeking her? And so her curves and cleavage she'll give us hints of, making us strain to see around her corners, which is impossible to do with the senses we commonly possess. It's as if she wants us always wanting, never having, while the poet loudly yearns to be possessed by her. And are they being honest when they whine on and on about their muse and their inspiration, their women and their cigarettes, their tales of woe, injustice, beauty, always pointing to a hunger that they cannot describe, because if they could describe it, they would not want for anything more. They would become what they want themselves. And if this is true, if it is true that a man becomes the simulacra of what he most desires, if he becomes the outline of what he allows his lust to inhabit, to adulate and to adore, then just as poetry cannot be trusted, so neither can her pallbearers and sycophants, nor their instruments, nor their material, words, language, colors, emotion, rhythm, sound, and dreams, and all of that. If I am to surpass them, then I need to find a way to start with something other than that, other than this, other than what I've already started with. My first project, as a man, must be to find a newer and rarer material, to invent or to discover a way to make a rounder wheel. As for your gift of a few dollars Canadian, they were well received. It is easy to be poor and famished, but difficult to express real gratitude for a kind gesture. Ibid. Jonathan, there was this kid on stage. I could see greatness in him, plain as day. And why did I become jealous? So much of his act was an act. So much of it was derivative of another culture and another time, but his performance was just a bit more than the donning of a guise. I don't want to say he channeled the spirit of the folk, because it wasn't a mimicry, and neither was it a facsimile. It was a recreation. And it needed work, and yet the moment his set ended, the entire room had changed. The gaps between everybody's words were somehow filled with, what was it? Some sort of belonging. As if they owned what he had given them. As if the audience took part in what he played. And all I saw was vermilion or chartreuse or whatever color of jealousy is. Or whatever the color of jealousy is. I didn't want to accost him to pillage or poach his gift. I don't want to do what he did or be like him, but still, he made me realize that I don't have the key, or I don't have the timber, or I do not have the tone of voice or the heart to do that, to give people something that they can own. He isn't by any means a master, but very likely could be one day. And seeing him, I realized that I'm hardly even an apprentice yet. Ibid. Jonathan, civil unrest runs through the streets, and I look down on them with pity. Pity because all their energy is being wasted. The momentum of what they rail against is too deeply rooted to suddenly morph by the dent of their rage and subsequently create for them a life they ardently cry out for. And what sort of life is that? Easy access to dry goods and milk, a steady current of electricity, water, and employment, greater representation and lesser taxation, a decrease of war and an increase in prosperity, equality among equals, sensitivity among strangers, rent that is never more than a quarter of our income, work that is never more than a fifth of what we find unpleasant, children who are quiet and respectful, parents who only say the right things at the right times, police who are more concerned with aiding the common man than abetting the commonwealth, a divine balancing of the powers awarded each sex throughout the plenty-fed rungs of public-private life. Immunity to pregnancy, to infertility, to incontinence, to perjury and insult and invective, to all the stings and pains and struggles of the life of petty organisms, to all the blasted downsides of the life of an individual. Who the hell created this world, and why shouldn't we wrest the reins from him and change it back to Eden, back to Eden? And I pity them. They will eventually get their way and stamp out all injustice, all sexism, all pessimism, racism, classism, capitalism, communism, and then they will sit down to enjoy the fruit of their labors, only to realize that they are still incomplete, that they are still clueless as to who they are. And do you know what they will do then? They will re-erect their injustices. They will become wholehearted members of the systems they seek now to overthrow. They will worship money, nouns, and pronouns, and their accumulation and their distribution in all their ragged, thrilling virulence of property, selfishness, and war. Because without these things, life is frightfully unpleasant, calm, harmonious, perfect, but most terribly, boring as all hell. Ibid. Postscript. I do not say there is no need for all those problems to be solved. They need to be and will be solved in one way or another by the ingenuity of people, eventually and with effort. But the real work will be, and always was, internal, which is the source of these external outbursts and oppressions. The protester uses the same ugly, violent, repressive energy as those at the helm of the regime he defies. The pauper is overwhelmed by the same short-sighted greeds as the man who he is indentured to. The one dives into drink with the same thirst as the other dives into his piles of gold. And those anarchists who fight the system, do they have anything but a vague, and therefore filled with the feeling of freedom, idea to offer in place of the luxuries and opportunities provided by the definite, concrete, apparent, and therefore filled with an air of oppressiveness structures? Do they offer anything but another form of pleasure centered on a grand communal feeling, a bit more abstract than the feeling of a freshly upholstered car? A new dining set, a neat rectangular plot of land with grass to keep trim, a house that is by deed and title yours, with a swimming pool and swing set out back for the kids, whose childhoods you are charged with making as rich and full of opportunity as you can. Both the communist and the capitalist don't have the slightest clue what we the people are capable of. Either left or right mindsets are beholden ever to the lowest and most simple aspects of what a person desires and deserves: kindness and a full belly. The root of evil isn't mammon, it is instead mimesis. Ibid. Jonathan, I sang last night to a crowded room, and my voice seemed to retreat into the furthest corners, curling safely into the darkest folds behind the swiveling heads. My voice slipped through all the listening to me and left my words naked on the stool, vibrating into the microphone, swaying like a row of decoy mallards on the measured ebbs of my guitar. I felt like no one, but in a positive sense. I felt like I had become a glass or a mirror that is seen completely through, and my voice, with its repetitive intonations and exhortations, it crept about the room, stealing sips from cans of beer and grazing the leggings of quickly thinning runaways. My voice was like an incubus for that moment, but a lazy one, who need not creep into a womb or steal the seal of virginhood. It was content to lap against the wool-gloved knuckles of these sons of dock workers and insurance salesmen. These children sprouted from the return of America's fighting men from the last great war of the European powers, these folk, as they call themselves. And while my voice licked the soles of their shoes and tasted the bitter creams they used to keep their bangs in place, I knew myself as one of them, united in the listening to the words that formed out of me, the words finally forming something out of me, the words that traced a stepladder into the sky, a cheap Hindu trick that the angels, and a few consenting minor deities shed their luminous dandruffs down. When Leith's face emerged from the tobacco smoke, and her eyes drew passively me back to myself, telling me I need to find work, telling me by the hue of her skin how difficult this life has been for her. She belongs to history and to books, and I'm forcing her into this now that wants to degrade her into a shriveled matron, or a briefly pretty trick tacked to the arm of one of the three-piece nobles that come and go in the circadian rhythm of monetary flows. We are all decoys. What matters is the voice that we become, the voice that capers along the frozen corners of the buildings looking down on us, and grateful for the words that have uprooted us out of ourselves the surface where all can congregate for fractions of an hour to become a campfire. My awareness as the smoke shot through with twirling sparks. Ibid. Jonathan, it seems I've made my first sale. Jessup's Anger. Bought by a respectable Jewish man who invited Leith and I to dinner after I signed the verses over to be filed in a catalog for the next a cappella foursome to render into an all too clean and way upbeat ditty. But he was warm, the man who carted off my song to slaughter, and at his house some color returned to Leith's cheeks as his daughter chirped beside her like a restless finch and took Leith off to her room while the man took me to his den, where vestiges of Europe and the old European artistry were arranged side by side with the lopsided furnishings of present day. The machined and the handcrafted arranged in a phalanx of old and new that became like those woven papyri they hold in clear plastic boxes at the History Museum. And I know there is a certain strain of modernity that is dissatisfied not only with the past, but as well the actual present, and so it imagines a guise of newness for its products that means to stand inside the future, and for that reason it ages quicker, or with less grace, than do the artisanal forms crafted wholly from the skill and sight and aesthetics of the past. But sitting in his den, I was comforted by the contrast, sipping something rare and ancient, something from the old world, listening to his stories of musicians that he's known, then asking me warmly about what I think the purpose of a song is. And as I opened up my mouth, somewhat unknowing what would follow from me, The interlacing of the leather and the plastic, the gold script and the glass, the metal and the patiently carved and coated wood. The mixture of the present and the past took hold of me, and my eyes wandered across the book's spines till they landed on an empty slot among them, a dark rectangular gap that spoke volumes to me as I said, "The purpose of a song is to introduce possibility into the world again. The same purpose actually of the child," the next line is scribbled out. And he smiled, warmly but also with a sort of sadness that tipped me off to why he bought my song. And why he probably was going to keep it from ever being recorded, so that right then I hummed a bit of its melody as Leith and his daughter came back to us, his daughter who I recognized as a song herself, but a song made manifest, complete and yet not finished. I would have undone her dress to look on what is paramount, to what the song he bought from me exposed, but did not, for her eyes would have been too painful to look on ever again. What does a song see? And Leith and he shook hands, and I half jokingly offered to sign a record deal with him, but he shook his head and told me, "Only a fool would pass on you, but so would a wise man, and I am unfortunately the wrong combination of both." He gave me a bit of a bonus, though, and his check cleared, and Leith has been cooking meat for us every night since then. Ibid. Jonathan, thanks for writing. I like it when you share your details, especially the ones that expose the covered currents of your heart life. Real love is precious, and I'm sure your instincts are spot on. Leith has gone off to see her parents for a week, and I've been playing regularly for more than coffee and cigarettes, and even got invited onto the radio a couple times. The sound of darkness in a microphone that is being broadcast live is tremendous. I could sink into it and be lost inside the wavelengths for the span of generations. If only I'd be permitted to keep writing new material. I can fathom a life without the schizophrenic rush of I can't fathom a life without that schizophrenic rush of bringing new things into being, which is why I guess I'm kept from falling through the diaphragms and why there remains that reverb of space and time around me, keeping me myself. But that profundity of the open airwaves, kind of like right now, I can hardly stand the radio myself. Listening to music gets in the way of my listening for music. But on the other end, sounding out feels like I'm just about to discover where the possible and the impossible intersect. Not the actual, but the impossible, the yet possible. And that is what I want to become, an intersection of those two. And I wonder who before me has wanted this, who before me has wished to become a bridge that time applies its motions to, where inside himself, as signs, all cogent matter bulges into being, arranged in infinite forms, and to wish for dissolution is common, all too common for my kind, my type, the poet. To pine for recognition and for attention, any 2-year-old can tell you all about that. But to become myself a playing field, to in the infinite dark fashion a whole new set of laws, and then to orchestrate those laws into such a way that like a cityscape, a host of players come and take up residence inside me, to live out their lives inside me. This is such a female wish, isn't it? Am I recalling a past life as an architect or a brood mother? Ibid. Jonathan. Leith doesn't want to return, or else her parents don't want her to. Sometimes it's impossible to distinguish her will from theirs, as they both come packaged in the same handwriting, using the same voice. But then again, maybe there is no her will. Maybe there is my will and her parents' will, and she is perfectly free of all volition. Volition in the sense of deciding on a certain course of action and continually redeciding on that, whether to be with me or not, whether to live in Toronto or New York, whether to go back to what she wants or what she wants or what she wants to be with me, to study France's artistic intrinsic tumults, or to follow her parents' wishes, which are probably just to marry the sort of man whose insides and outsides are perfectly identical, whose future is a simple, gradual, inclining line from its beginning to its steep drop-off end. It isn't that she cannot value things or to decide which has more value to her. It's as if she respects every want that passes through her to such a degree that she cannot deny one. Even if she wants something else more, she feels that she must not choose. She must not refuse. And so she trembles acutely to the pitch of hesitation. Hesitation. And is that what drew me to her in the first place? Or was it her being drawn to me that made of us a couple? But it's past the time for these sorts of doubts. Even my frustrations are besides the point. She knows I'm here, and while she's not, I fill the space reserved for her with make-believe and melody. P.S. I swore I wouldn't oblige this pedestrian indecency with a confession, but once I got home and into bed, the thoughts kept colliding. Thoughts, emotions, moralities, what are these things? They are painful. I'm at least certain of that. Painful like a needle is, and at the same time more diffuse. She was wearing something like a costume, and she was halfway between the front row and the bar. And her beauty was Roman, with something Swedish in her forehead, eyes, and in the flaxen straightness of her hair. Overall, her demeanor was simple, with an easy health. Who the hell would come up with such a phrase? Easy health. I need coffee. There. I've stained the page for you, giving additional evidence to this piece of evidence. She was substantial, is what I'm trying to say. Her eyes dark, and on her left cheekbone a row of sequins glued in the arrangement of the Pilates. And it wasn't that she wanted me. Up there before them, I have little attraction to bald desire, because it always turns out to be really about proving some sort of point or to mark a division in their lives. Here I speak of women. But she wasn't wanton, wasn't lusty, wasn't willing or open or ready, easy. It had to have been her simplicity. It had to have been that I wanted to partake of something simple. She tasted like a change of state. She tasted like a gateway. She was only in town for last night and this morning, or so she said, and I feel pain not because of Leith, but because I can't help comparing she with her. I'm speaking here of two women. I feel pain at the reflex to use the word them. Leith's indecision crowds around me as if to defend her honor. But there is nothing for me to choose between or to refuse, and time will forget from me the feeling of that deliciously unfamiliar body, her jaw that didn't move much as she spoke, the side of her makeup undone by a pillow, the unique warmth and weight beside me as she slept, and I stared off out the open window, seeing no stars because their light and the cities are so at odds. So at odds. Ibid. Jonathan. I find myself negating the attempts at art and artistry and poetic articulation dribbling from the mouths of others. I find myself praying that they will move on and return to speaking of mere acts and objects in regular life, the same conversations I run from, that I deplore. I cannot stand their poetic gestures any more than I can their grounded pleasures. I strain to sift myself from them. I want to incinerate their attempts and their trialed pretending. Say nothing but the word that speaks you. I want to shout, while at the same time I'm burning from the inside, reeling along the avenues, flushed and broken, ailing from all that is in me that is not worthy, that is an imposition on the word inside me, of my faltering, shallow worldliness. Ibid. Jonathan. On the subway, for the first time in weeks, I realize how much we take for granted the power of people as such. Not the people, not that lofty, vapid notion for which nations are established, no, but people. Watch them clutch their purses in folded newsprint. Watch them jostle as the train picks up speed and then slows down. And here I am, wrestling with notions of aesthetics, while all that is really, when all that really is not so much holy as drastically human. All that lives is human, John. For all intents and purposes, human. And you're a humanities major, so you understand approximately how little we know about what is human. We know so little about our human nature that we fashion distractions for ourselves, blathering into existence 100 routes of escape from the real true question ever hanging over us, through which all of life actually comes to us, creating things like ontology and epistemology and phrenology and every other graven alchemy of the mind. What is being? What is knowing? What is existence? We can wrestle with these for centuries, millennia, but when it comes to what is man, not even religions delve into that. They at best delineate humanity, assigning for us an origin and a couple optional outcomes. But context is not a sufficient definition, and the people, as such, continue seeking food and shelter and continue dating and mating and then staring out the window with a look that straddles everything between ecstasy and dismay. A purely human look, caught up in the memory of a strawberry's taste or imagining what it would have been like to not have such an argumentative brother. I wrestle with art and I wrestle with passion, but were I to smile and squeeze a single stranger's shoulder, I'd be more accomplishing something infinitely more substantial than this reaching attempt. Ibid. Jonathan, I feel mad. I feel like there's no basis to stand on. I know this is temporary. I know this is the product of a transition between two floors, as it were, as I move closer to the earth from my young, idealized state. I crawl through the city with my guitar and strike up pointless conversations and look too much at women in the wrong way, then lay it on too thick when I am singing. I can hear my affectation like a cocoon or a bandage or maybe a soggy pillow, strangulating whatever inspiration has been allotted me. Do we each have a certain amount to give the world? Do we each have a predetermined measure of brilliance to cash in on? And after that runs out, we begin to run up debts by way of mannerisms and regurgitated patterns of speech. Think of old men, how they repeat the same 5 stories over and over, the moments that most impacted them. And if you're lucky, these recollections will come without the burdensome moral lesson tacked onto their end. The part of the story that is themselves talking backward through time at themselves. Even just a metaphor that runs rampant through my life, like a new religion, converting every stumbled upon moment into its singular way of framing things. How much I fear that. I fear that even more than I fear this gripping anxiety that the act of writing you really drains out of me. This can't all be about Leith, can it? I feel as though both beatitude and iniquity are women who only have to smile to get their way. Ibid. Jonathan. He bought another song. I guess that makes him my patron, doesn't it? The kind and warm Jewish man. I wouldn't mention that he's Jewish, but that he uses it to define himself. Little Yiddish sayings, these ritualisms in his business tactics, and the trim of his beard and scalp. Of course, we celebrated the deal at his house. This time, a meal of roasted duck and cranberry sauce. His daughter asked me about Leith, and I made up an inconsequential chronic illness that we can't afford to take care of at this time, and thereafter the intelligent girl leaned on her father almost imperceptibly to maybe get him to sign me. And I wouldn't do it. I would spend 5 years writing doo-wop songs and cardboard ballads, and I'd keep my heart in a jar that's reached into and liquidated over time of the remaining guidance, destiny, or passion stitched to its muscle. But the warm man wouldn't take his daughter's directions. I didn't ask him again for steady patronage. I know he wants me in the cold. I know he knows how important it is for my art to be unfettered by the ease that money brings. We had already made a tacit agreement, one outsider to another, that I would submit myself to the millstone of poverty to render up the best of all possible flowers for him to salt and leaven into the cakes that the mass of American goyim so desire. And the best of my best, the finest of my finest, he will preserve from the profane. We have a deal, he and I do. And I think his daughter understood this at length, because at the end of the night, as I was walking away, she opened up her window and threw a scarf down at me, inside of which was a note scrawled with a time and a place, which is where and when I write you, waiting for her to show. Ibid. Jonathan. And then Leith returns. 2 weeks into a brash new liaison with the intelligent, soft-spoken, perceptive Jewess, and Leith arrives at my door with a suitcase. A suit, which is a case, which is an action, an argument, a reason to exhaust resources, to prove by the letter of the law that one is right or the other is wrong, or else someone will be awarded reparations. I couldn't not let her in. I can't not resume our life together, but our life together had become two lives, and we both know it won't return to being an our life without something major and traumatic to fuse us back together. So maybe that's why I let her find out about my affairs. Or maybe that's why she let herself find out about them. To pursue her intuitions down that rabbit hole and out the looking glass. It has been ugly between us. It has just been shy of a nightmare, but my madness has escaped beyond my notice. And I am able to juggle the one and the other woman because there really is no them. There is only her. The letter writer writes capital H for the her. There's only her. I hope you never find this out, because it's a terrible knowledge. It is the very knowledge that ancient poets and philosophers and theologians have warned us about, this veil that implies there is more than one woman. For millennia, man has suppressed them simply so they'll remain divided. He's driven their knowledge underground, otherwise it'll accumulate like rampant clouds above us, delivering chaos. They are chaos. They are nature defined as nature. The nature that man says is that he says is not this. They are beautiful to lose myself in. Even the arguments, the scratches at the internal bleeding that result from night's shouting are smoldering with all the heat that warms the seat of Hades. These arguments, so much define my life as a living event. They so much make things real that wouldn't be real otherwise. Did I tell you about Leith's 4 lines are scratched out? And that is life. Life is a chain, and to break it is the only way to prove there's no escape. Ibid. This is crossed out. Jonathan, this is crossed out too. Bah, again she goes to the doctor, and again when she returns, she expects me to. And then there's 6 illegible lines. The letter is restarted on the other side of the page. Jonathan, I found what was on my patron's shelf, that empty spot among his books. I remember writing to you about it. Situated between the past and future, he handed it to me. He said it was something that his father found. His father had apparently been a bookseller in Vienna and in Paris at the turn of the century. The manuscript is bound, but the leaves are brittle, and much of the writing takes a great effort to decipher. I've been entertaining myself at the typewriter, cleaning it up, and at times it seems like there's this other book inside it. Not hidden, and not exactly another book, but more of it, wanting to be read, than can be seen by the eye. Pages glued together, but not physically. Not in the object that sits there, but that the object nevertheless points to. When I have a clean draft, I'll send you a few pages. You sound good. I do want to visit. Leith and I are living in the same apartment, but we are not really together. Better where I write, not fully together. She thankfully has found a group of friends and has been taking some courses at Columbia. Oddly enough, one is on European ceramics, which ties into the manuscript, the book. I don't know what to call it, and the name of the title page doesn't seem correct. The Prophet of the Beautiful. There's very little prophecy in it so far, but for the time being, I call it The Prophet. It's about, actually, and sorry this letter is so fragmented. I'll let it speak for itself. More soon. Update me on your engagement. I'm looking forward to hearing what sort of surprise you'll orchestrate. Oh, engagement. Surprise. Ibid. Jonathan. Hard to believe summer's almost here. I was about to write, spring is almost done, but no one ever says that, do they? Not that I'm one to adhere to convention, but there's a certain logical tension between spring and summer that makes summer's arrival more important than spring's departure. As though both spring and fall are the transitory seasons and winter and summer are the states of being that are dreaded and pined for in our bones. I wonder if that's derived from some ancient ancestral experience of the solstices, or maybe that equinoxes don't mean as much to us as apexes and nadirs. I've been performing still and playing out, and my patron has introduced me to a couple trustworthy but infrequent publishers. I am making rent, and with Leith's parents' money, eating more than the bare minimum. I have to say that I haven't been terribly social since I arrived here, but my contact with people of my age, station, and interests has dwindled to almost nothing since I began working on the Prophet. My mood is quite stable, too. And Leith and I are engaged in more than formalities, it seems. I have the patience to listen to her, and she has the interest to listen to me. And as for my Jewess, she takes me to poetry readings, and while I rarely enjoy the experience, the after effect is overall beneficial to me. Listening to amateurs and pretenders spout inanities does good for my most important relationship, the one between me and our language. It helps me to hear what is harmonious being exposed to the cacophony does. There is something else. I really shouldn't write it down, and so I won't, but I have found something that helps me dream clearer and stronger and deeper. It's not illegal, and yet it's not perfectly illegal. It's better than junk and more worthwhile than grass, but I don't think it will really catch on like psychedelics and pharmaceuticals have. It's too volatile, but already I'm saying too much, especially as this letter is traveling internationally. Again, I would like to visit. In a few weeks, I'll be receiving a decently sized payment for one of my tunes, as I force myself to think of them, because they are not songs. They have a minimal amount of possibility in them. That has been getting play in Europe and parts of South America. Yes, I get paid for supplying foreign countries with the semblance of American culture. Another floor I've descended from those ideal heights. But after I'm paid, I will look into buying a ticket north and east. Ibid. Jonathan. Walking with Leith through Central Park, our hands slipped into one another's, and at once I felt a strong, warm bond between us, a channel and a connection. And I asked her if she felt that, and she said she's always felt that. And I saw her in a new light. And I saw the power that she wields, something greater than what I spoke of when I accused her of being volitionless. She is a queen in her court, and every impulse and decision are her courtesans, and she has the room to contain them, which is something I can't manage. I must act, I must exert, I must perform, and she must regard regally each and every option, each and every path, each and every fruit and labor. For this reason, she can be scratched out. Feeling at that bond between us, I closed my eyes and let her guide me, swerving along the pathways of the park, overhearing the elderly and the young and those persons in between, upon whose shoulders rest the world. I listened to the sound of people, and I felt the tether between myself and Leith, and I tried to understand its shape. What connects us is like a spiral. It's like a vine work or a root system. And later on that night, making love to my fair Jewess, of the black curly locks and the skin as soft as any surface that can afford to exist in this world. Sliding with her through the slopey sensualities of the body, I reached past the feelings and past the dark that blanketed us. I reached into our connection and saw it like a past, and saw it like a pillar filled with blue and wild cracks of light, like lightning slowed down to 1,000 times. What connects us is pure electricity. What connects my mistress and I is radiance, whereas with Leith we are bound by warmth, a golden amber warmth, and that brings to mind, do relationships exist on a spectrum? Are there completely different connections and qualities of being together that might even harmonize with one another? We have these ugly words like bigamy and polyandry, but is there not a secret there in how human beings enter into unities, and how, like notes upon a scale, there is a combination that rises above any given single note? I must be careful, though. A man cannot afford to have two moons. They do disastrous things to his internal tides. Ibid. Jonathan. A secret is simply something you must find out for yourself. A secret is simply something you must find out for yourself. This phrase has been running through my head for at least a week now, and I can't figure out what it pertains to, but a third woman has entered into my life, and she is Violet. Her command over me, Violet, eerily otherworldly and intense. We do not touch, we talk, and so touch with our minds, and nights will pass in an instant, as we converse, traversing impossible stretches of land. She is giving me knowledge, or we are sharing a certain knowledge between us. She might be imaginary, but that would be sub rosa, sub ochre, subtil, and so obscure, wouldn't it? And so you wouldn't get it because a secret is something you must find out for yourself. Ibid. Jonathan. I've set up some time in a studio and I'm trying to get everything down that is worth remembering. My life as a musician is nearing its conclusion. I can feel it, an apocalypse. The good and the bad are being separated, the unworthy being gathered up to be destroyed, leaving only the virtuous ideas, the righteous ones, the ones that don't simply hold meaning, but hold glimmers of fecund potential, seedlings to reforest the soon-to-be fire-devoured world. I think all artists who are content are damned by their contentment. I am certain that all great art is the product of great dissatisfaction. There can be no looking back, no hold on to past successes. All brilliance detaches itself from its source and cannot be reclaimed as something internal, something that we had once felt within us before giving birth to it. Those who merely want to be artists are restrained from being so, not by the largesse or diminutivity of their intelligence or their passion or their genius or imagination, but by thinking that the I who makes is somehow the owner of the creation. Ownership works with material objects because they are stable enough for us to enforce our possession of them. Yet in the realm of culture, 9/10 of the law is possession, and only 10% is possessing. And the former possession is a being possessed by not the object of art, but by art's objective, which is to, this part's left blank. I will record these 80 tracks and then I'll sell my piano and guitar and take up the pen. I've found the book within the book. I have found the book within. Ibid. Jonathan. My amber lady, my scarlet woman, and my soft, dark-haired Jewess, they gather round me as I sing. As I close my eyes, I see them and turn to each of them in turn. Each song belongs to a different one, a different sensuality, a different axis in and out of manifestation, which the women try and provide and represent from me, and draw from me, and allow me to inhabit and embody her body. Woman's body has given body to me, to my eye, to my man's body, so that perhaps I might embody the states multiplicitous and many-colored, to bring them into being for others to explore. And the relationship between myself and these muses, these morae, is not like I have read described by others in the histories of the arts. They, my muses, do not provide me with inspiration, but they provide my inspiration with the audience, even imaginary, needed in order to get it out of me. Like a pubescent teen who needs to construct fantasies to release his pent-up seed. That is what my muses give. The chance to give out of myself the raw energy into a real, even if fluid, even if only sounded form. And so I sing to them as I perform into the microphone, and the endless darkness beyond is shaped into their shapes, just as the black vinyl is shaped by the shapes my voice box makes and my instruments too, to recreate the reality that has no shape, but is only actually, ever at most, a presence. Ibid. Jonathan. My Jewess has been leaning on me to make a choice. Does she not see that I am not qualified to be with her in any official, open, direct way? I am the servant of another god than the god of her father. She is like my father, only opposite. She is enough a fool to want me, and enough a wise woman. She is like her father, only opposite. She is enough a fool to want me, and enough a wise woman to want my promises. But neither of these can be the case. I run my hands over her. I know how to stir up her contours so that the life she contains froths over all over the room hidden within the abandoned warehouse that is the site of our liaison. Touching her is something automatic, something that precedes and supersedes language, thought, intention. And yet she wants my words. But words root us into the realm of time, the realm of recordable history, the realm of one thing leading into another, and the casualty of our relation, the sensuality that we enter into among the drapery of that couch. That realm is purely immediate, thus purely transcendent. We become the ideals of man and woman within our shrouded embrace. And that is how I make sense of art's obsession with cloth. I've been trying to crack this now for months, why painters and sculptors rely so much on the flowing drapes covering over their subjects. Of course, it showcases their mastery of light, texture, color, but it is the feeling of the cloth that accompanies every lovemaking. That molten liminal textile that wraps the bodies of men and women who in their garden of delights merge helplessly and superhumanly into unity. And no, if what we accomplish while laying atop one another is not proof and promise enough, then nothing I might say will cement her surety. They are a contractual people, the Jews are. Every facet of their lives they have numbered, weighed, and divided. And even if the Christ came and told them, if all this minutia is not filled with love, it is doomed to dust, still, that they have parceled life into so many vessels to catch the Spirit astonishes me, even as I remain a Gentile. And it is written into my genes to spill, to smash, to revise everything I come across, everything that makes up myself, everything that makes up my life. Ibid. Jonathan. It turns out Leith has been... She blames me. I know she does, but I've joined her. It doesn't affect my dreams at all. It aids them after a fashion. I must keep watch over her. There are times when she means nothing to me, and then other times when she is a burden. But I know in the end we share a sort of fealty, the type that only a single man and woman can establish, a unique bond that nature makes and man's mind constantly refuses. To be the source of generations is both miraculous and devastating. And even if we couldn't bring ourselves to let the truly new ones through our gateway. But why do I speak in past tense? Why do I feel so often that life is already over? That my present is in fact the past? That only memory can give proof of my even existing? This is why I write to you. This is what these letters mean. To have them over there on your desk or in the shoebox that you keep them, the thought that they exist, rubber banded together in your care, it makes me solid. It does. It helps me see my life as something more than a burden, something more than a meaningless jumble of phenomenon. It makes me make sense. What she's brought into our life is the sickest sort of poison. But I join her. I am like Orpheus, only in reverse, doing all I can to follow her down, my eyes never straying from her grim and fading face. Ibid. One moment. Jonathan, I asked my third dame who she wants me to choose between, and she asked what I meant, as if there were no other women in my life but her. And maybe she is right. Maybe she is woman to me. And Leith is not life, but my life. And my mistress is not work, but my work. So that this, my other woman, must be somehow woman incarnate. But if a woman means woman to a man, what means woman? What does that truly hold, that vessel that she is, which turns out to be another vessel? What are all the things that woman has meant to man? And what is it about man that he must attach a meaning beyond the apparent meaning to everything important to him, so that his own importance can be proved time and again? All these countless codes of society, have they not been formed in order to keep life from suddenly becoming meaningless? Humans are suckers for meaning and spewers of meaning, and I stared at my violet dame, my third woman, who may and who may not be, which neither of those holds a flame up to the state of being with me. Her eyes on my eyes and the gentle slopes of her body as she reclined, tracing circles on the pale skin along her ribs, just below her right breast, her lips moving, but all I heard was noise. And then I woke to Leith shivering, her fever soaking through our bed. I got up and made her something hot to drink, and looking out the window, I was caught by my reflection, the darkest parts of my image, viewing me, the city, who was yet another woman, mother, sister, daughter, lover, virgin, virago, vixen, and vampiress, gnarled crone, knowing Venus, instructive Juno, nascent echo playing dolls among the narcissus. I brought Leith a mug of tea, and then I returned to the kitchen where my typewriter sits, and I opened up the tome and continued to transcribe it. I have lost the need to experiment with songs and notes and others listening. A story exists wholly in the mind and can configure a broad enough reality to enter in and then assume, and lastly perpetuate something new into the moments of this churning, faceless, common world. Signed, Ibid. Jonathan, it isn't finished, and I've sent you more than I planned, but things here are getting unstable again, and I can trust you. Keep this for me. I'm traveling south for a couple months, and I cannot take it with me, and I cannot leave it here. This city is a combine, and it's hard to tell what it will uproot and what it will pass over. I'm fine, don't worry. Write down what you think of this, and I'll let you know where to send your next letter. Signed, Ibid. Little signature thing or like a break in the page, and then a note from the editor of this, which is the person who Ibid has been writing to this whole time. And the note says, "That was the last I heard from my friend for nearly 6 months. I read through what he sent and eagerly awaited both news of his well-being and the remainder of his MS. I do not know how you would like to print this volume, but I've gone ahead and arranged it as I myself read it. Then we travel back in time, and I am not going to read that part of the book because this is a completely different way of writing. The sentences are completely different. We're going to skip over that, and we're going to pick up where the letters end. If you're just tuning in, this is Benjamin Boyce, and I'm reading a manuscript that I wrote in 2013, in the fall of 2013, for the Dark Romantics program at the Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington. I was surrounded by a bunch of young poets, and it made me think about being a young poet, and I wanted to go back into that point in my life and try to do right by that person that I was back then, in all his vein and glory. Jonathan, I'm sorry to keep you waiting. I'm back in the city after a season and a half of not exactly hell, but in the desert, and kept in close quarters with a handful of the same people. So yes, a season in hell. It is good to be back among the populi, to be able to lose myself in the thrall of rushed persons. Good, until those who know me come a knocking, and then the feeling that I am in hell returns, and I want to leap out my window, impale myself on the rusty fire escape, screaming for escape, for respite, even before a word comes from their mouth. But I won't dwell on that. I should catch you up. I left New York abruptly on the suggestion of a mutual friend of Leith's and mine. He was heading down to Arizona to live in what they call an artist's commune. You know me, I can't help despising all community endeavors, and I'm quite inflamed by art. So, as you would expect, I experienced quite a bit of expansion and contraction, even at the sound of those two words rubbing up against each other. But the truth of my life, as Michael, the man in question, pointed out, was such that I needed to get away. I needed to flee, for my sake and for the sake of those around me. And I was exhausted. I've never been so exhausted. It wasn't the exhaustion that comes after a day of back-breaking work. I'd get a good dose of that at the artist's commune, but a deeper exhaustion, a spiritual exhaustion. I had nothing left in me, nothing left to give. I had let things, women, wine, and words, milk me dry, and what was left in my empty basin were a few pebbles of sorrow and one glowing chunk of hatred. Not black hatred, but red hatred. The hatred that turns into black hatred. As stars move through different stages, so does hatred. And with each change of state, there's a crisis that occurs. And Michael pointed out that what was headed toward me, what I was headed toward, and he basically abducted me. I put enough money on the nightstand to see Leith through a couple months' rent, and I loaded up in a rattling van with a couple others and left the city. Just as soon as we entered the Holland Tunnel, I felt myself returning to myself. That is also when the shakes set in, and it was many days of living dying before I was more or less with it. There were ways of cutting down on some of the terror, but nothing that helped me get through it, other than simply getting through it. I don't remember arriving at the commune, actually. I remember faintly a change in the air and the position of my body and a pair of breasts and the taste of lilac mixed in with my vomit. There were concrete sensory data like this, but largely all I recall of that time was a darkening, lightening diffuseness. I think that I thought I was visiting a place that existed only in my dreams. Not in any given person's dreams, though. Not my dreams, not the dreams of you or Leith or scratched out others, but a place amalgamated from a group of people's idling imaginations. I walked about this place, though I was not me, but like me, and empty, though not angry, lost, though not without direction. Then the breasts again, the first duration of time that was solid, that was furthermore personal, and eventually her eyes, the reddish blonde of her hair, the strength of her arms, the smell beneath them, the friction of her pubic hair against mine. Oblivion. Rest. I awoke, finally, and was famished. I drove myself out of bed, out the door, into the light. Everything was sun. Then there was land, fences, a garden, a few young women, topless, hoeing the earth, a couple of men talking with each other and eyeing the women. One of the men spied me, approached, then wrapped his arms around me until I felt my ribs about to buckle. His beard was against my face, kissing my cheek, and then he dropped me to the ground. I saw stars speckling my vision. Then the other man approached. He was thinner, his hand in mine limp and moist. He was soft-spoken, too. He said I should eat, then come to the gathering at 3 p.m. He pointed me in the direction of an adobe structure, little bigger than a townhouse. There were raindrops painted on the door. I entered into it, found a bunch of couches, tables, chairs. I approached a young woman, actually, still a girl. She must have been 15, no more than 17. When I was near enough to smell her, I backed away. Legalities reached into my gut and began to do weird things to my intestines. I asked where the bathroom was. There was a shed out back. I went there and sat for a while, my bowels quivering. Emptied. I didn't know what else to do, so I returned to what I thought must be the cafeteria or meeting house. Before I entered, I washed my hands beneath the spigot to the side of the building. A host of tiny lizards scattered from the barely damp earth as I approached. Their scuttling brought to mind something I had been thinking about for the last few days, something I couldn't fully bring to mind. Then I bit the bullet, entered the dim, couch-filled space, and sat down on the firmest chair I could find, waiting for her to approach me. This was the least I could do to maintain my self-respect. Eventually she returned, bringing me a sandwich and a Coca-Cola. The Coke felt contradictory somehow, almost impure here. But I didn't know really much about what their goals were, and they were an artist's commune, so maybe sugar and caffeine were an accepted part of the process. I drank the soda and ate the sandwich, and she came and went, and as she came and went, I watched her. I thought of the men outside watching the working women, and I examined my gaze for what I saw in theirs, which wasn't exactly lust, though it wasn't without hunger either, and anchoring, maybe. Yeah, an anchor. She returned to me and asked how was the food. I thanked her. I asked her name and she told me. Then she told me about her sister and they're taking turns with me. My bowels began to loosen when she touched my forearm. Her fingertips were cold. I grabbed her hand and tugged her onto my lap. The plate fell from the table beside me and shattered, and I remembered something. Not too far in the future, but right then I needed to warm her body. I rubbed her hands and her feet until they were no longer icy to the touch, then asked her for another Coke. She looked at me funny, expected what you yourself probably expected, but I was content with the flush of her cheeks, the room temperature feeling of her fingers. I told her again to grab me a soda. While she was gone, I stood and examined the photographs on the wall. They were of cattle, cowboys, some from the Civil War, nothing especially talented, but for one that caught my eye, of a horse drinking from a trough. The photograph seemed too old to be of that subject matter, and for that reason maybe it stood out. But also the feeling of that horse, of that animal drinking. It struck a chord in me, and I remembered music. I remembered everything I had forgot about making music. The drawing upward of the heat, of the heart, the widening of the chest, fuck, scribbled out, just knocked on the door. I'll have to get back to this. This line is scratched out. I can't believe that. The letter continues. No, this will be about something other than where I am. This isn't a confession, not anymore. It's another sort of document, one that relates facts and ideas without fear of reprisal, without expectation of the judgment to come. Now, what was I writing? The feeling of music. Yes. And she came back, the girl did, but it wasn't her. She was wearing different clothes and there was a different sort of smile on her face. And then I became hungry for her, for to have her. But I asked instead for an instrument. She pointed me to the piano in the corner. I sat and played, and the notes that were in me were furtive and too reliant on happenstance, but I sensed the notes beneath them, which I would be diving toward once I was acclimated again to melody, and I carried on like that until people began arriving. I lifted up my hands and began to protract the key guard when a middle-aged woman asked me to continue. The direction of my playing then became about all surface, for that is the level of conversation, at least at first, at least before there are matters to discuss. I skipped my harmonies across the wavelet coiffed mare, and my mind began to sketch out, not in any great detail, but rather in sloppy outlines, the situation I had fled from. The web that had sprouted around me, wove by women and drugs and my own acquiescence. And in those outlines I began to see the greater shape of my trouble, my dilemma. It seemed like it was a question, a single, tremendous question pulling evidence to itself. And again, I find myself using the language of judgment. I will not resist it. My life as a musician, as a poet, as an artist is the working out of one hypothesis. And as soon as I find out what that hypothesis is, I'll know what my real work has been all along. The work lying beneath each line, each verse, each refrain, each word, driving them along. driving me through debaucheries and then delivering me from them, for a time, to play piano for a gathering crowd that quieted, as did my hands, when the soft-spoken man stood on a stool and addressed us, his voice clear, calm, and melodious. Here's a speech. The world concerns itself with revolution right now. Our generation takes up the flags of peace and of love and raises their fists to the old regime, but their energy is unorganized. Beyond their high-mindedness and their defiance and their excitement, they are in a mad, chaotic rush to go nowhere, to build nothing specific. They need their ideas tested, made plastic, made elastic, made sharper, examined for weaknesses, and for the ability to include more situations than passion and revolt and the childish adoption of the boheme life and the bohemian fashion. They need philosophers and they need artists to raise up their inspirations and make them uniquely applicable to this era. They need thinkers and poets to break open their ideals by way of oversimplification and overgeneralization, and then sew those shards back together this time into a garment of not a simple vessel, something that allows for movement and for work. They have been handed, our brothers and our sisters out there in the world, in the states of United America, they've been handed the greatest apparatus in the history of all revolutions. In the history of all eras, it is they who have been gifted the most powerful weapon of all time. And they hardly know how to use it. They hardly know how it functions. And it will be their undoing, or the undoing of their ideals, this media. It is color television. It is billboard and the cheaply printed poster. It is the record and the record player, the microphone and the tube amplifier. It is not any given one of these, but all of them in conjunction that makes what our compatriots are attempting to do seem and therefore almost be much greater than it was for their parents and their parents and their parents. Never before have millions of young people been given a single view of an event at the same time. Never before have millions of children's eyes examined the same four men making music. Never before have so many been united in a specific viewpoint, and this viewpoint has magnified them and galvanized them, and now they are tall enough and smart enough to take control of the cameras and the microphones and the mixing boards and the printing machines and the airwaves and the images and the sounds all together, but their ideas haven't yet been tested. Their wit is unrefined, unexamined, unprepared. And that is why we have removed ourselves from them. Not to turn away, but to see better and with greater scope than what it is they are after. What it is that is really driving them, or rather, what is the best that they have to offer, that they have to add to history. That is our only mission here. It isn't to found a new cult. It isn't to try out the pure, the simple, the idyllic life. All utopias are doomed to fascism. What we are here to do is to concentrate on the world and on our time, and then bring back the two or three, the maybe 5 or 6 concentrated lumps of earth distilled from tons of mud and silt, the handful of truly timeless, truly valuable, truly timely testaments of our generation. To find these, to cut them, to polish them, and then to bring them back with fury and with a great deal of wrath until every one of them takes notice and compares what we have found with what they have been wanting. And then we can surrender. We can let go, victors or failures, savers or pretenders. For once we've shown them what we've found, what we've given our best to get to, then it is out of our hands. It is up to the pendulum of history to take those jewels up or to send them to the bottom of the heap. He paused then and made a short bow, of course, saying, "Thank you. Now Paula has some housekeeping business to talk to us about. Please volunteer for whatever you think you can manage. Menial labor is neither our holy grail nor penance for original sin. It's just necessary." A short woman with a great black mane of hair stood up and with a rapidity of tongue bordering on the virtuoso, listed off things that needed to be done about the commune or the compound or whatever they thought to call it. I volunteered for some light demolition and followed a couple of men, the big bearded one who had hugged me, and another, short and portly, into the early afternoon and up a hill to a hut nestled in a granite gulch. We entered the hut and began dismantling its furnishings, setting the pieces aside in piles for burning and piles for reuse, and another pile for the metal and appliances and stuff that existed in that borderland between junk, curiosity, and weapons, I guess. While we worked, the two others chatted about this girl and that, about this movie and that, about this politician and that. Once, the bearded man, whose nickname was Ursula, I commented on my piano playing from earlier, and while his comment had a general air of compliment to it, I didn't want to talk. I wanted to be lost in the work at hand. I wanted to dismantle everything that had been used in the life prior to this one, to separate and divide everything into piles that were useful and useless and something between. Taking stock of each orgasm from the last year, each performance and each argument, counting up each dollar earned and each dollar spent, and how they were spent, which ones were invested foolishly and which ones wasted wisely. I brought to mind the different faces of each of my women, and how many faces there were. There is either one woman or an infinite woman, Jonathan, as I think I once wrote to you. They are either unified or multifid, but so long as I am one, they are one as well. And insofar as they are many, I am many too, come to be a man anew, or a different man, by the taste of lilac and bile, by the feeling of cold hands, ripe breasts, by the smells and the sight of them walking toward me, walking away. Each woman is like a song, some more resonant than others, some more catchy, some more driving, haughty, alluring, inspiring, listenable, some like anthems and others like lullabies. And this world is filled with music, Jonathan, of all types or just one, being music, being muse, being musing. And if I could line woman up single file and then sit down before them to only see the one in front, with billions arms of all sizes, lengths, shapes, undulating, unfolding, would I be any better off? Would I be any safer, any less lost, any more certain of my individuality, of my humanity? I think not. I think there must be a secret in the belly button of women. And if we could crawl into it, we'd find a tunnel leading to the edge of time, where both the beginning and the end strobe interchangeably, sectioning off each moment as its own eternity, like a projector does with a roll of film, which we of course overlook to see the movie. I felt a hand on my shoulder and I turned to see Ursula's hairy face, one eyebrow cocked upward, asking me what the hell I was doing. I looked down at my hands to see the crowbar in them and the floorboard beneath, what I had evidently pried up. It was dark down there. The portly guy got on his hands and knees and peered into the darkness. He said he saw a huge effin' hole. We drew straws, but I rigged the draw to lose, or win, that is, to get my way. After finding some rope and tying it around my waist, they lowered me slowly into the huge effin' hole. Its walls were hard and rough, and I sensed no moisture as I descended, the light from above me tapering off, as did their voices, talking ceaselessly, becoming the white crush of the waves on the beach, leaving me the pain of the rope around my hips and the rocking motion of my descent. How many men have been lost inside the earth? Physically, probably hundreds of thousands. Spiritually, probably billions. The earth hugs us to it. It makes us heavy and face downward to apprize the lowest parts of life as the most valuable. I felt the voices of what must have been a third or even half of humanity murmuring about not having enough time or owing too much money or scolding their children or breaking this thing or that for breaking this thing or that. I heard their cares and their worries, and I wanted to pass past that. I wanted to pass beyond all pettiness, even my own, especially my own. In the dark, descending, I was left with my own emptiness, and I contemplated its different aspects. How the abyss to me is so many things. The abyss of the world's indifference to every single thing I make. The abyss that follows the taste of wine dissolving on the tongue is just gone. The abyss within my bitter dismissal of my time and my generation. the abyss that follows the quivering renewal of a vigorous fuck, the abyss of trying to get better and better, but never seeing any progress, never escaping from the anxiety of congruence with a style, congruence with a defining genre. Everything I could possibly make is inextricably bound up in response, in reply to something else that was already made. A musician, the best musician at root, wants to escape sound, the best poet to escape words, the best fictionist to escape story, plot, metaphor. The best philosopher wants nothing more than to discard meaning entirely and to know, to merely divinely, instinctually create. But we are constantly pressed to the earth, and to memory, and to everything heavy in our existence, to the fact that our existence is partial, that our potency is too soon to be diluted, that our love will in time become a chore, that our passion will become hollow, a repeatedly emptying gesture. There is no escaping this fact that when all is said and done, nothing needs to be said and nothing really needs to be done. The darkness of night is speckled by stars and monthly interrupted by a moon. But those show us not what surrounds us as we stumble forward, but instead prove only our distance from everything other than us, from that moonlit life so full of dreaming, from that vacuum shrill with silence above us. And what seem glittering jewels end up as nothing more than balls of blazing molten matter being broken down, being broken down, being broken down and burnt out to their constituents, which are all cold, dead, witlessly spinning dust. I felt water soaking into my boots. I felt water, and I pinched the knot made in the rope around me, and I twisted it until it became loose. Then, freed finally from the surface of things, I dove. I dove and gripped the uneven walls to propel me downward further, faster, until the coarse rock fell away, and there was nothing for me but for weightless, breathless, requisitionless oblivion. Well, there's a bunch of poetry. This is Benjamin Boyce, and you've tuned in to a live stream performance of The Prophet of the Beautiful, a novel in 3 parts that I composed at the Evergreen State College in the fall of 2013. It was written specifically to the artists and protesters around me who would, about 4 years later, fulfill all the stupidity I accused them of, I guess. Anyways, there's a lot of prophecy going on in there that I just saw. I haven't read this in a couple years. Actually, I thought the writing was pretty bad, but it felt good coming out of me. So I guess we have some people listening to me. We should probably wrap up. We got midday eyes on me. I just read for 2 hours, or no, an hour and 20 minutes. Not 120 minutes. Unless somebody has, I don't know. The people in the comments are just like having their own conversation while I'm going off on my thing. So I don't know if there's any worth in jumping in on that. Should probably just wrap up. It's good. Give a minute for somebody with a question. Kudos. Thank you. Yeah. I'm just going to wrap it up. You guys can start over from the beginning. I'll go back to working on protest footage. I hope you guys are safe and warm and well fed and doing everything that's right for you to be doing with your life. Also, happy Ramadan for those people engaging in that practice of quieting oneself from the passions of the world for a few months to hopefully glimpse of glitter of something wider than is proposed to us by our constantly narrowing passions. I'd say good night, but it is the day. I'm going to go for a walk. See you later.